The village had been buzzing with excitement for weeks. Banners were hung, the sound of drums echoed through the narrow streets, and the sweet smell of celebratory feasts filled the air. It was the most anticipated wedding of the year. Her family, known for their status and honor, was preparing to host a ceremony that would be talked about for generations. The bride-to-be was the talk of the town. She had always been seen as the epitome of grace and beauty. Dressed in traditional fabrics with intricate beadwork, her face radiated with the promise of a new chapter in her life. Everyone admired her. She was known for her charm, her elegance, and her seemingly perfect upbringing. The village had watched her grow up, and now they would see her wed. But as the wedding day approached, something began to stir beneath the surface of this picture-perfect event. Quiet whispers rippled through the village, hushed conversations in the corners of the marketplace, exchanged glances between neighbors. Something was wrong. "She's been with every man in the village," someone murmured at the local well, their voice barely above a whisper. Others dismissed it at first. How could such an absurd rumor be true? She was the pride of her family, the future wife of a well-respected man. The thought of such scandal was unimaginable, but the rumors refused to die. Day by day, they grew louder, spreading like wildfire. And soon, the entire village was buzzing, not with excitement for the wedding, but with shock and disbelief. Could the rumors be true? Had she really been involved with all the men in the village? The question hung in the air, heavy and unsettling. Her once glowing reputation was now under threat, and as the wedding day inched closer, the village waited, curious, scandalized, and eager for answers. What had really happened? How could someone with such a perfect image carry such a scandalous secret? The truth, it seemed, was about to come to light. She was the kind of woman everyone admired. From a young age, she had been the pride of her family and a shining example of what a respectable daughter should be. Her beauty was undeniable, with smooth skin that glowed under the sun and dark, expressive eyes that could captivate anyone in an instant. She carried herself with grace, always modest and respectful, never once stepping out of line. Her presence alone commanded attention. Her family was one of the most respected in the village. Known for their adherence to tradition and strong moral values, they had raised her with the highest expectations. She had learned all the skills a proper wife should possess: cooking, cleaning, and the art of maintaining harmony in the household. But beyond her domestic skills, she was also known for her kindness. Whenever someone in the village needed help, she was the first to offer a hand, whether it was caring for children, tending to the sick, or simply being a shoulder to cry on. As she grew older, her reputation only seemed to blossom. She became the symbol of virtue and tradition, the type of woman every mother wished their son could marry. For years, whispers of potential suitors filled the air, each family hoping to secure a match with such a rare gem. But she remained patient, waiting for the right man, one who would uphold the values she cherished and bring honor to both their families. Her upcoming wedding was no ordinary event. It was the culmination of years of anticipation, not just for her family, but for the entire village. People talked about it for months, discussing every detail from the guest list to the lavish decorations that would transform the village square. Everyone wanted to be part of the moment when she, the perfect daughter, would become the perfect wife. Her fiancé was a well-respected man from another notable family, and their union was seen as a match made in heaven. It was the kind of wedding that would be remembered for generations, a celebration of tradition, honor, and love. Or so everyone thought. No one could have imagined that, beneath her flawless exterior, a storm was brewing. Her reputation, carefully built over the years, was now hanging by a thread. The rumors swirling around her painted a picture so far removed from the image of perfection that it seemed impossible. How could the village's most admired bride-to-be carry such a scandalous secret? And what would happen when the truth was finally revealed? At first, it started as nothing more than a faint whisper, one that seemed too outrageous to even consider. A group of women gathered at the well, chatting casually as they drew water. One of them, a widow known for her sharp tongue, leaned in and whispered something that made the others freeze in place. "Did you hear what they're saying about her?" she murmured, glancing around as if someone might overhear. The others leaned in closer, intrigued but skeptical. "What do you mean?" one of them asked cautiously, her eyes narrowing with curiosity. The widow hesitated for a moment, then finally spoke. "They say she's been with every man in the village." The words hung in the air like a heavy cloud, leaving the small group in stunned silence. At first, no one could believe it. It seemed impossible. This was her, the woman everyone revered. The idea that she, of all people, could be involved in such scandalous behavior was beyond comprehension. One of the younger women scoffed, shaking her head in disbelief. "That's ridiculous. There's no way. It must be a mistake." But the widow, known for always having her ear to the ground, just shrugged. "Believe what you will, but I heard it from someone who knows." Her words carried a sense of authority, the kind of gossip that couldn't be easily dismissed. The seeds of doubt had been planted. Soon, the whispers spread, quietly at first, from one household to another. In the marketplace, behind closed doors, and during late-night gatherings, people began to talk. The rumors took on a life of their own, gaining momentum with each retelling. "I heard she's been sneaking around at night. They say she's been with not just one man, but many. Every man in the village, can you imagine?" The more the rumor circulated, the more it seemed to grow, feeding off the village's collective shock and disbelief. But there were still those who refused to believe it. How could someone who had always been so proper, so virtuous, be capable of such a thing? Her reputation was practically untouchable, and the idea that it could be shattered so easily felt absurd. "It's nothing but malicious gossip," some said, dismissing the claims with a wave of the hand. "She's about to marry, people are just jealous." But despite these reassurances, the rumors refused to die. Instead, they spread deeper into the village, reaching the ears of elders and other respected members of the community. The once idyllic anticipation of her wedding was now tainted by the growing shadow of suspicion. People began to wonder, was there any truth to these rumors, or was it all just a terrible misunderstanding? As the wedding day inched closer, the whispers became louder, harder to ignore. It was no longer a question of whether something had happened, but what exactly was the truth? The village, once filled with excitement for the grand event, was now on edge, waiting for the moment when everything might come crashing down. As the days passed, the whispers that had once been confined to small circles began to spread like wildfire. No corner of the village was untouched by the growing scandal. What had once been casual, hushed conversations had now become the main topic of discussion. No one could escape it, not even she. People who had once greeted her with warmth and admiration now avoided her gaze. The respectful nods and friendly smiles she had grown accustomed to were replaced with judgmental stares and whispered conversations behind her back. It was as if the village had turned against her overnight. Her closest friends, once eager to stand by her side on her wedding day, began to distance themselves. At first, they offered weak excuses. "Oh, I've just been busy," or "I've got so much on my mind." But it wasn't long before the excuses ran out, and their silence became impossible to ignore. She could feel it everywhere she went, the weight of their stares, the unspoken accusations lingering in the air. The village market, which used to be a place of community and connection, now felt hostile. Whenever she approached a stall, the conversation would fall silent, only to resume in hurried whispers as she walked away. "I heard it's all true," one woman said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And to think I let her into my home," another replied, shaking her head in disbelief. What will this mean for the wedding? Even those who had initially defended her began to waver. As the rumors grew louder, it became harder for anyone to hold on to the belief that it was all just a misunderstanding. Doubts crept in, and soon, even the most loyal among her friends began to question everything they thought they knew about her. "I don't know what to believe anymore," one of her childhood friends confessed during a private conversation. "People are saying so many things, and, well, how can I be sure?" It wasn't just the whispers and stares that hurt, it was the isolation. The people she had grown up with, the friends she had shared her dreams and fears with, now treated her like a pariah. No one wanted to be associated with her, afraid that their own reputations might be tainted by the scandal surrounding her name. Weddings were sacred in the village, a symbol of purity and honor. To be linked to someone at the center of such disgrace was unthinkable. Some parents even warned their daughters to keep their distance, fearing that association with her would damage their chances of future marriage. "We can't have you seen with her," one mother told her daughter. "What will people think?" And so, one by one, they withdrew. Friends, neighbors, even distant relatives began to fade from her life. Invitations to gatherings stopped coming. Conversations that once flowed freely now felt stilted and awkward. She found herself increasingly alone, trapped in a village that once embraced her, but now saw her as something to be avoided. What hurt the most was that none of them had asked her for the truth. They had accepted the rumors as fact without ever giving her a chance to explain. With each passing day, the tension grew. The village was no longer excited about the wedding. Instead, they were waiting to see if it would be called off altogether. No one wanted to miss the inevitable unraveling of her reputation, the fall of the woman they had once held in such high regard. And as the wedding day approached, the question on everyone's mind was no longer, "Is it true?" but "What will happen when the truth finally comes out?" Her parents had always been proud of her. They raised her with the highest standards, ensuring she would uphold the family's reputation and traditions. Her father, a man of few words but strong principles, had worked hard to build the family's honor in the village. And her mother, known for her grace and devotion, had spent years guiding her with the same values. But now that pride was turning into something else. Confusion, disappointment, and, worst of all, fear. At first, they didn't pay much attention to the rumors. Her mother dismissed them as petty village gossip, a jealous attempt to tarnish their daughter's impending marriage. "People talk," her mother had said, waving it off. "They have nothing better to do." But as the rumors persisted, even they couldn't deny that something was wrong. Everywhere they went, people greeted them with forced smiles, awkward silences, or worse, pity. "I thought we raised you better than this," her father finally said one evening, his voice thick with frustration as they sat around the family dinner table. His stern face was a mask of controlled anger, his hands clenched into fists. She sat silently, staring down at her plate, unsure of what to say. Her father's disapproval felt like a heavy weight on her shoulders. But what could she say to defend herself when the entire village seemed to have already made up its mind? Her mother, usually the softer one, was no less shaken. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked quietly, her eyes searching her daughter's face for answers. "We could have handled this, stopped it before it got out of control. Now, it's too late." The words stung. She wanted to scream, to tell them that the rumors weren't true, that everything had been blown out of proportion. But the truth was complicated, and she knew that even if she tried to explain, they might not believe her. Tension filled the room as silence settled between them. Finally, her father spoke again, this time more quietly, but with even more weight. "What are we supposed to do now? Your wedding is days away. People are questioning everything. Do we go through with it? Or do we call it off and save what's left of this family's dignity?" Her heart sank. The wedding had been all they talked about for months, the grand celebration that was supposed to unite two respected families and strengthen their position in the community. And now, because of these rumors, it was at risk of being canceled. Her mother's voice broke the silence. "Do you love him?" she asked softly. "Does he know? Does he still want to marry you after everything that's been said?" The question hung in the air. Did he know? And if he did, how would he feel? She hadn't dared to ask him, afraid that his answer might confirm her worst fears. What if he believed the rumors too? Her father sighed deeply and stood up, his face weary. "I have spoken to his family. They are concerned. They want answers. We need to make a decision." He turned to her, his eyes hard. "Do you want this marriage or not?" Torn between the pressure from her parents and the uncertainty of what her fiancé knew, she struggled to find the right words. She knew what this marriage meant to her family, and she knew what losing it would cost them, not just in reputation, but in pride, in honor. But was it worth it to move forward if everything was built on lies and scandal? Her mother reached out and took her hand, her eyes filled with sadness. "You need to tell us the truth. If these rumors are true, we need to know. We can't keep planning a wedding that will only bring us more shame." She felt the walls closing in around her. What could she say to them, to herself? She didn't have all the answers yet, but one thing was clear. The decision they would make in the coming days could either save her family's name or destroy it completely. The tension was palpable, and as her parents waited for her to speak, she realized that no matter what she chose, nothing would ever be the same again. After days of sleepless nights and mounting pressure, she could no longer hold it in. The weight of the rumors, the judgment, and the isolation had taken its toll, and she knew she couldn't stay silent any longer. Her parents deserved an explanation, and so did she. Sitting in the quiet of her room, staring out the window as the sun dipped below the horizon, she gathered her thoughts. She knew that no matter what she said, it wouldn't change the fact that the entire village had turned against her. But maybe, just maybe, if they understood why, they could at least begin to see her side of the story. Her motives had been complex, even to her. The truth wasn't as simple as everyone thought. It wasn't about immorality or carelessness, as the rumors suggested. It was about something far deeper, something that had been building inside her for years. When she finally spoke to her parents that evening, her voice was steady, but filled with the weight of everything she had been carrying. "I never intended for it to be this way," she began, her eyes fixed on the floor. "But I couldn't live by their rules anymore. The village, this life, it's like a cage." Her parents exchanged a confused glance, but they didn't interrupt. They could sense that this was something they needed to hear. Something more than just a defense against the accusations. "You've always raised me to follow tradition, to be the perfect daughter, the perfect wife to be," she continued, her voice soft but unwavering. "But do you know what it feels like? To constantly be watched, judged, told what to do, who to be. I had no say in my own life." Her father shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but her mother leaned in, her brow furrowed in concern. "We only wanted what was best for you," her mother said gently. "We wanted you to be happy, to have a good life. But what if that's not what I wanted?" she asked, her voice rising slightly. "What if I didn't want to marry someone chosen for me, to live a life that was planned out before I even had a chance to decide who I am?" She paused, her hands trembling slightly. "I've spent my entire life trying to fit into this perfect mold you made for me. But deep down, I felt like I was suffocating. So I did what I thought would give me some control over my life, some freedom. I made my own choices, even if they were reckless." Her father frowned, struggling to understand. "But every man in the village? Why?" She closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering the courage to speak the full truth. "It wasn't about them," she said quietly. "It wasn't about the men. It was about me. I needed to feel like I had power over my own life, my own body. I was tired of everyone telling me what to do, how to dress, how to act, who to marry. They treated me like a prize to be won, not a person with her own desires and fears." Her mother covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with shock, but she remained silent, listening. "It wasn't love," she admitted. "It wasn't even about desire. It was about proving to myself that I could make my own decisions even if they were wrong. I needed to know that my life was still mine." For a moment, there was only silence. The truth, her truth, hung in the air, raw and painful. She knew what she had done had consequences. She had hurt people, confused them, made them question everything they knew about her. But she also knew that this was the only way she had found to break free from the suffocating expectations that had been placed on her from the day she was born. "I didn't want to be a pawn in the village's game anymore," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wanted to be free. Even if it meant losing everything, I needed to know that I could choose my own path." Her father's face was hard to read, somewhere between anger and deep sorrow. He had always expected his daughter to follow the path laid out for her, to marry well, to honor the family. But now, for the first time, he saw that the weight of those expectations had crushed her. "We never wanted you to feel trapped," her mother finally said, her voice shaking. "We thought we were doing what was right, what would make you happy." "But that's the problem," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "You never asked me what would make me happy. You just assumed I wanted the same things you did." In that moment, her parents saw her not just as their daughter, but as a person struggling to carve out her own identity, someone caught between tradition and the desire to live authentically. She hadn't been seeking to ruin her future. She had been trying to find it. But now, the consequences of her actions were unavoidable. Her protest against the rigid traditions of the village had taken a toll far greater than she ever anticipated. The wedding, the family's honor, and her relationships with those she cared about were all hanging by a thread. "So what do we do now?" her father asked, his voice thick with emotion. She didn't have an answer. The only thing she knew was that for the first time in her life, she had spoken her truth. Whether that truth would save her or destroy everything she had, only time would tell. The village was a tightly woven fabric of traditions, customs, and unspoken rules. When something threatened to tear at its threads, the elders, the keepers of these ancient ways, were the first to step in. The rumors had now reached a boiling point, and the village council of elders had no choice but to act. The wedding, once seen as a grand celebration of unity, was now at the center of a growing storm of scandal. In the heart of the village, the elders gathered in the meeting hall, a place where the most serious matters were discussed. They were men and women of wisdom, tasked with upholding the moral fabric of the community. The atmosphere was tense as they sat around the long wooden table, each of them wearing expressions of concern. The topic of conversation was clear: her behavior and the impending wedding that had thrown the entire village into turmoil. "This cannot be ignored any longer," began one of the elders, his voice grave. "The rumors about her have spread throughout the entire village. People are talking, and our community's reputation is at stake." Another elder, a woman known for her strict adherence to tradition, nodded in agreement. "If we allow this wedding to go forward without addressing these accusations, what message are we sending? That such behavior is acceptable? That a woman can do whatever she pleases and still be honored with marriage?" The room murmured in approval, the weight of her actions pressing down on them all. For generations, the village had prided itself on its strict moral code. Women, especially those from respected families, were expected to be paragons of virtue. A wedding was more than just a union between two people. It was a public affirmation of the community's values. "We must think of the family's honor," another elder interjected. "This scandal does not only affect her parents, her siblings, even her future husband. They are all tainted by this. If we allow the wedding to proceed without answers, it will damage the standing of the entire family." The mention of her family's honor sent a ripple through the room. Her father, a well-respected man, had spent his life building his reputation. He had raised his children to follow the village's customs, and now his daughter's actions threatened to undo everything he had worked for. "The family must provide answers," the eldest among them said, his voice firm but measured. "We cannot proceed with this wedding until the truth is known. If these accusations are true, then we have no choice but to call off the ceremony. The community must come first." As the discussion continued, the elders weighed the potential fallout. On one hand, calling off the wedding would be a public acknowledgement that something had gone terribly wrong. It would signal to the village that there were consequences for actions that defied tradition. On the other hand, allowing the wedding to proceed without addressing the rumors would undermine the values they held so dear. "What of the groom?" someone asked. "Has anyone spoken to him about this? Does he know what is being said about his future wife?" There was silence in the room for a moment. The groom's family, though from another respected lineage, had remained surprisingly quiet throughout the ordeal. Some whispered that they were embarrassed, unsure of how to react. Others suggested that they were holding out hope that the rumors were false, clinging to the idea that the marriage could still go on. "He will not remain silent for long," one elder said. "Soon he will have to make a decision, whether to stand by her or walk away. And if he chooses to walk away, what will that mean for the rest of us?" The elders knew that the groom's decision would be crucial. If he chose to end the engagement, it would be seen as a clear message that this behavior, whether true or not, was unforgivable. But if he stayed, the village would be left in a state of confusion, unsure of where they stood on the matter of tradition and morality. Outside the hall, the villagers were growing restless. Many of them had gathered around the meeting place, waiting for news of what the elders would decide. There was a sense of anticipation, mixed with fear. People wanted answers from her family, and from the groom. "She must explain herself," one woman said, standing among the crowd. "How can we trust someone who has been hiding such a secret? How can we celebrate her wedding if we don't know the truth?" Others, though less vocal, shared the sentiment. The village was built on trust, and once that trust was broken, it was nearly impossible to rebuild. Parents began to talk about what this scandal would mean for their own daughters, worried that the village's sense of morality was beginning to crumble. "If we let this pass without judgment, what's next?" An older man muttered to his neighbor. "Our daughters will think they can do the same. And what then? Who will want to marry them?" The pressure mounted on her family. Each day brought more stares, more whispers, more demands for answers. Her father, who had once been proud to announce his daughter's engagement, now avoided the market altogether, too ashamed to face the people who had once respected him. At home, her parents debated endlessly about what to do. The mother, still torn between protecting her daughter and preserving the family's honor, could barely sleep. The father, though still deeply disappointed, struggled with the knowledge that their reputation was slipping further by the day. "If this wedding doesn't happen, we may never recover," he said gravely one evening. "Our name will be tainted forever." But at what cost? The family was on the verge of losing everything they had worked for, all because of choices that no one fully understood. The village, too, was teetering on the edge, caught between their desire for justice and their fear of what might happen if they allowed the wedding to go on. The elders, the villagers, and even her family demanded answers. And as the wedding day loomed, everyone knew that a decision would have to be made, one that could either restore the village's faith in its traditions or shatter it completely. The day had finally arrived. It was supposed to be the most joyous occasion the village had seen in years, a wedding that everyone had been talking about for months. But now, instead of excitement, the air was thick with tension and uncertainty. The streets, once filled with cheerful preparations, were now quiet with anticipation. Everyone was waiting, wondering if the wedding would actually happen. The village square, where the ceremony was set to take place, had been beautifully decorated. Brightly colored fabrics hung between trees, and garlands of flowers adorned every corner. The wedding feast had been prepared, and the sounds of drums echoed faintly in the background. But despite the beauty of the setting, an uneasy silence hung over the village. People whispered nervously as they arrived, unsure of what to expect. Some had come out of curiosity, eager to witness the outcome of the scandal that had rocked the community. Others, still clinging to the hope that the wedding would proceed, had come dressed in their finest clothes, as though refusing to acknowledge the rumors that had surrounded the bride. The groom stood near the altar, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. He had spent sleepless nights thinking about the rumors, torn between his love for her and the pressure from his own family and the village. He had asked her for the truth, but her answer had been vague, leaving him even more confused. Now, on the day of his wedding, he didn't know if he could go through with it, or if she even wanted to. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the guests shifted uneasily in their seats. They exchanged glances, each wondering the same thing. Would she show up? Her family was already there, sitting at the front, their faces drawn and pale. Her mother's hands trembled as she adjusted the folds of her dress, her eyes darting nervously toward the path that led to their home. Her father sat stiffly beside her, his expression grim, as though bracing for whatever might come. The weight of the village's judgment was on their shoulders, and they knew that this day could either save or destroy their family's honor. Then, a murmur spread through the crowd. Heads turned as someone appeared at the end of the path, walking toward the square. It was her. She moved slowly, deliberately, her steps measured and calm. Dressed in her wedding attire, she looked every bit the bride, but there was something different in her demeanor. Something strong, resolute. The whispers grew louder as she approached, the villagers straining to see her face, searching for some clue about what she was about to do. The groom's eyes widened as she came closer, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the weight of the village's gaze on him, but all he could focus on was her. He needed to know, was she going to stand by his side and become his wife, or was she going to walk away, leaving him and the entire village to wonder what had gone wrong? The elders, seated near the front, watched intently. They had been silent during the days leading up to the wedding, waiting to see how things would unfold. But now, as she approached the altar, they leaned forward, ready to witness the moment of truth. She stopped in front of the groom, her eyes locking with his. For a long, agonizing moment, no one spoke. The entire village seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for her to make her decision. Finally, she turned to face the crowd. The villagers, who had been buzzing with speculation for weeks, fell silent. Even the children, sensing the gravity of the moment, were still. "I know what you've all been saying," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I know the rumors, the whispers, the judgment, and I know what you expect me to do today." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the sea of faces before her. Some looked away, embarrassed by their own participation in the gossip, while others stared back, waiting for her to explain herself. "I made mistakes," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "I won't deny that, but those mistakes are mine. They don't define who I am, and they don't take away my right to choose my own path." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time the villagers saw her not as a symbol of scandal, but as a woman standing up for herself. She turned back to the groom, her eyes softening. "I never wanted things to turn out this way. I never wanted to hurt you or anyone else. But I can't marry you like this, not with all of these lies hanging over us." The groom's face fell, but he nodded, understanding her words. Deep down, he had known this moment was coming. The weight of the rumors, the pressure from the village, it had all been too much. "I need time to figure out who I am," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly now. "I need to be free to make my own choices, without the fear of what people will say about me." The crowd was stunned. No one had expected this. Many had assumed she would either go through with the wedding to save face, or run away to avoid the shame. But here she was, standing in front of them, owning her past and rejecting the life that had been planned for her. The elders exchanged glances, unsure of how to respond. This wasn't how things were done. A bride didn't simply walk away from her wedding, but there was something undeniable in her strength, something that even they couldn't ignore. Her father, who had remained silent throughout the ordeal, stood up slowly. The villagers watched as he walked toward his daughter, unsure of what he would say. Would he scold her? Would he beg her to reconsider? But when he reached her, he simply placed a hand on her shoulder. "If this is your choice, we will support you," he said quietly, his voice filled with both sadness and pride. He had lost the wedding, the union that was meant to elevate the family's status, but in that moment, he had regained something far more important: his daughter's trust. The groom, though clearly heartbroken, stepped forward. "I wanted to marry you because I love you," he said softly. "And if this is what you need to do, I won't stand in your way." Tears welled up in her eyes as she nodded, grateful for his understanding. She had hurt him, but in this moment, he was giving her the freedom she had so desperately sought. The village remained silent as she walked away from the altar, her head held high. It wasn't the ending anyone had expected, but it was the one she had chosen for herself. The wedding that had been the talk of the town for months was over before it had even begun. But in its place, a new chapter had started. A chapter in which she would finally be free to decide her own future. As she began to walk away from the altar, a tense silence still gripped the village. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure of what to do or say. What had just happened was unprecedented. No one in the village had ever witnessed a bride turn her back on a wedding like this. The elders, who had been so vocal about upholding tradition, were now left speechless. It seemed like the scandal that had rocked the village was finally drawing to a close. But just as the tension began to ease, a voice cut through the silence. "Wait!" someone shouted from the back of the crowd. Heads turned sharply to see who had spoken. It was one of the men, someone who had been part of the whispers surrounding her past. His face was flushed with nervous energy, but there was something determined in his eyes. He hesitated for a moment, glancing around at the curious faces staring back at him, then stepped forward into the open space near the altar. The crowd buzzed with anticipation. Who was this man, and why was he speaking now? What could he possibly have to say that hadn't already been said in hushed whispers throughout the village? I need to tell the truth, he stammered, his voice trembling slightly as he faced her and the villagers. There's something you all need to know. Her heart pounded in her chest. She had expected the day to end with her walking away, finally free from the weight of the rumors. But now, it seemed like there was more to the story, something she wasn't prepared for. The rumors, they aren't true. At least, not the way everyone thinks, the man began, his voice growing stronger as he continued. I was one of the people who started them. Gasps echoed through the crowd as everyone turned to look at him in shock. Her face paled as the weight of his words sank in. He had started the rumors? All of this, her isolation, the shame, the nearly broken marriage, was because of him? Why? Someone shouted from the crowd. Why would you do something like that? The man looked down at his feet, guilt weighing heavily on him. I did it because... He hesitated. Because I was jealous. Her eyes widened and the crowd murmured in confusion. What was he talking about? I was jealous of her fiancé. He admitted, his voice thick with emotion. I wanted her for myself, but she didn't choose me. So, I let my bitterness get the best of me. And I spread lies. The villagers looked at one another in disbelief. The man's confession felt like a slap in the face. For weeks, they had been consumed by the scandal, turning their backs on her, isolating her from the community. And now, here was this man, standing before them, admitting that it had all been based on his own petty desires. Her mother gasped, clutching her chest, while her father's face turned ashen with shock. They had believed the rumors, just like everyone else, and now they were hearing the truth from the very man who had started it all. It wasn't just me, the man continued, his voice faltering. There were others, other men in the village, who didn't like the idea of her marrying him. We all thought, if we could make her look bad, maybe the wedding would be called off. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with regret. I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. The crowd erupted into murmurs, the revelation spreading like wildfire. The men who had fanned the flames of the rumors, who had whispered behind closed doors, now stood revealed as liars, their jealousy and bitterness exposed for all to see. She stood frozen, her mind racing. For weeks, she had carried the shame of the rumors, convinced that the village would never see her as anything other than the woman who had betrayed their trust. And now, in an instant, the truth was out. It had all been a lie. The groom, who had been watching the scene unfold in stunned silence, stepped forward. His face was pale, but his expression was unreadable. So it was all a lie? He asked quietly, his eyes searching the man's face for confirmation. The man nodded, his head hanging low. Yes, it was all a lie. Her chest tightened, a flood of emotions crashing over her all at once. Relief, anger, sadness. She didn't know what to feel. The truth had finally come out, but the damage had already been done. The village had turned on her, her friends had abandoned her, and her wedding had been torn apart, all because of a lie. She looked out at the crowd, the faces of the villagers now filled with guilt and shame. They had been so quick to believe the worst about her, to accept the rumors without ever asking for the truth. You all believed him, she said softly, her voice barely audible at first, then louder. You all believed him without ever asking me what really happened. The crowd fell silent. No one dared to meet her gaze. I never did any of the things you accused me of, she continued, her voice shaking with emotion. But none of you ever bothered to ask me. You were so quick to judge, to turn your backs on me. And now, here we are. The guilt that weighed on the villagers was palpable. They had let themselves be swept up in the rumors, eager for scandal, quick to assume the worst. I wanted to make my own choices, yes, she said, her voice growing stronger. I didn't want to be trapped by your traditions, but I never did the things you accused me of. Tears filled her eyes as she looked at her parents. Even you believed the rumors. Her mother sobbed quietly, while her father hung his head, ashamed. The family honor they had been so desperate to protect had been sacrificed to the lies of jealous men. The groom stood quietly beside her, processing everything. Finally, he spoke. I should have trusted you. I should have known better." His voice was filled with regret, but there was something else, something hopeful. "Do you still want to marry me?" he asked, his eyes filled with sincerity. The crowd held its breath, waiting for her answer. For weeks, her life had been torn apart by lies, and now, standing here with the truth finally revealed, she had to make a choice. She looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest. The rumors had destroyed so much, but the truth had given her something else, a chance to start over. "I need time," she said softly, her voice firm but gentle. "Time to figure out what I want, who I am." The groom nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I'll wait for you." The villagers stood in stunned silence, unsure of what to do. The revelation had shattered their assumptions, leaving them to grapple with the consequences of their actions. As she turned to walk away, the weight of the rumors lifted from her shoulders. The truth was out, and while the path ahead was uncertain, it was hers to choose. The village was stunned into silence. The revelation had rippled through the crowd like a shockwave, leaving everyone grappling with their own guilt and shame. The men who had spread the rumors hung their heads, their faces pale and filled with regret. The villagers who had so readily believed the lies now felt the weight of their judgment, unsure of how to face the young woman they had wronged. Her life had been torn apart by rumors, and now, with the truth out in the open, the question lingered in the air. What happens next? For the first time in weeks, she no longer felt the crushing weight of their whispers or the fear of being judged. She had stood before them, declared her truth, and now, the choice was hers. The villagers might have been waiting for the wedding, but she was no longer bound by their expectations. Her parents, though still reeling from the confession, stood by her side. The father, once so concerned about the family's honor, now saw things differently. The mother, who had wept through the entire ordeal, took her daughter's hand. There was pain in their eyes, but also a quiet resolve. This was a moment of reckoning for their family, and they would stand together. But the villagers? They didn't know how to move forward. They had cast their judgments, and now they had to face the consequences of their assumptions. Would they be able to rebuild the trust they had broken, not only with her, but among themselves? The elders, who had been so quick to weigh in on the scandal, now sat quietly. They had been wrong, misled by the rumors and the traditions they so fiercely upheld. The fabric of the village, once tightly woven by shared values and customs, now felt frayed at the edges. How could they maintain their authority when they had been so easily deceived? Her groom, who had been silent since her declaration, stepped toward her. The love in his eyes had not dimmed, but he, too, was uncertain of what came next. He had been prepared to stand by her side, but now that she had chosen her own path, he respected her decision. "I'll wait for you," he had said. But even he knew that the waiting might be indefinite. The villagers began to whisper again, but this time it wasn't the malicious gossip that had torn her life apart. Instead, it was confusion and uncertainty. What will happen now? Will they still get married? How could we have been so wrong? The once perfect image of the wedding had crumbled, replaced by the harsh reality that life didn't always follow the script they expected. The feast was still prepared, the decorations still hung, but the celebration felt hollow. No one could go back to pretending things were as they had been before. Some of the villagers began to leave, their heads bowed in shame, while others lingered, unsure of how to reconcile their feelings. The joyous event they had come to witness had turned into something far more complex, an examination of their own values and their willingness to believe lies when it was convenient. As for her, she walked away from the altar with her head held high, knowing that the road ahead would not be easy. The truth had set her free, but it had also left her standing alone, at least for now. She wasn't sure what her future held, but she was no longer afraid to face it. The lies that had defined the past few weeks no longer controlled her, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she could decide her own destiny. In the days that followed, the village was a place of quiet reflection. The gossip had stopped, replaced by the uneasy silence of a community coming to terms with its own failings. No one spoke openly about the wedding that didn't happen or the scandal that had shaken their trust in one another. But the lesson lingered. Would things ever return to normal? Could she ever truly trust the people who had turned on her so quickly? Could the groom, who had waited so patiently, still be part of her future? Or had the events of the past weeks left too much damage in their wake? The answers weren't clear, and perhaps they never would be. But she had taken the first step toward reclaiming her life, and that was enough. What would you have done in her place? Would you have walked away from everything? Or stayed and fought for the wedding despite the rumors? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more stories that challenge our beliefs about love, trust, and community.